So now we are going to discuss the ultimate view of supreme generosity. By ultimate, I mean that view which will bring the most results, the best results, the most profound results. I would have to say that this is the uncommon view, that is the view that is not understood easily, and that even if it is taught and even if it is heard, it is still uncommon in that one really cannot understand this view through simply exercising one's intellect as one ordinarily does. By simply listening, by simply measuring out the words, by simply computing them, the same results will not be had as if one were to sit down in meditation and try to accomplish this particular view of supreme generosity. So we have to consider that when we're hearing this, that we haven't quite got the whole story, that there's more to it than this, that one really, that basically it's like going to the nursery and buying a seedling. Now we have a seedling. The seed has been planted, it's grown far enough to be able to understand intellectually, but it's just a seedling. And if the ultimate goal is to have the fruit, and to digest the fruit properly, and have it be true nourishment, then we all know that there's a period of time between when we have a seedling and we have its fruit. And even after that, there is the preparation and nourishment. So we have to have an attitude of maturity when we hear these teachings. Consider that they are precious and valuable and that they are like seedlings. Like seedlings, they have all of the components of the fruit, all that is necessary for the fruit, other than incubation and development, and that over a period of time we should have faith that the fruit will appear, because it always consistently has in the past when the proper motivation and determination has taken place. So with that consideration, we'll listen. So the ultimate view of supreme generosity. First of all, in order to understand the ultimate view of supreme generosity, one has to understand that this generosity, this compassion, this bodhicitta is inseparable from the Buddha nature itself and cannot be considered other than the Buddha nature itself. So in order to fully understand this supreme generosity in its most ultimate sense, one must understand something of the Buddha nature. In order to grasp the concept, to have the concept of supreme generosity at its most profound level, one must understand the state of precious awakening called Buddhahood. One must understand that that state is composed of two accumulations, first of all. The accumulation of knowledge and the accumulation of wisdom. That in the state of awakening, in what is called Buddhahood, one attains a state, attains the accumulation of knowledge to the degree that far surpasses the accumulation of knowledge that we have. That is to say that all cause and effect relationships are completely understood. No matter how old we get, or how well educated we get, or how thoughtful we become, or how persistent in our thoughtfulness we become, we will never have a complete accumulation of knowledge until we achieve the precious awakening. And the reason why is that this knowledge of cause and effect relationships is not complete if one only understands the content of one lifetime. And even at our best, honestly and truly, we only have a solid and tangible recollection of this lifetime, even if we remember right from the moment of our birth. And even if we are mindful of memory and continuity right up until the time of our death. At that moment, we only have a true remembering of the time between birth and death. We may think that in our meditation we have remembered something of our past lives. We may have a déjà vu experience and feel as though we have remembered something. We may have been told something by a psychic that seemed right to us. Yet, in the sense that memory is meaningful, that is to say, to the point where we can really learn cause and effect relationships and have them stick to our ribs in the way that our present-day life experiences do, we have nothing other than this present lifetime truly to look to as that kind of experience. But the Buddha, because he has achieved the state of awakening, has also achieved the omniscience or the awareness or the knowledge of the three times, that is past, present, and future. And so the Buddha is completely aware of all of the karmic cause and effect relationships that have brought us to this moment, and is completely aware as well of all the karmic cause and effect relationships or probabilities that are yet unborn, and is completely aware of circumstances as they exist now, with all of their component parts, because of the limitlessness of his awareness. This is so. And so, his understanding of cause and effect relationship is more complete than ours. When we achieve Buddhahood, when we awaken in the same way that the Buddha is awake, and if we practice sincerely, perhaps if we're fortunate, that time will not be far off. Yet, when we achieve that precious awakening, we have the capacity as well, because it is within the fabric of I shouldn't say fabric, but I mean within the potential of our nature for that omniscience to be completely unobstructed. So at that time, we will have that same full awareness of knowledge, understanding completely cause and effect relationships, not in a theoretical way, not in an imagined way, not in a supposed way, but in a viewed way. It is a way in which one can actually see cause and effect relationships, see it played out, see it in its totality. It is like the difference between describing a color to a person who has never had sight and a person who can see color being able to really look at color clearly and know what it is. That is the extent of the difference. So the Buddha also has not only the accumulation of knowledge, but also the accumulation of wisdom. And the accumulation of wisdom is the realization, complete and unobstructed realization of the primordial wisdom state. Because in Buddhist philosophy, true wisdom is not an accumulation of knowledge. It is not an accumulation of cause and effect relationships. It is not an accumulation of specific information. It is not something that can be gathered. In Buddhist philosophy, true wisdom is the realization of the primordial wisdom state. That is the precious awakening. That true view of nature, that is wisdom. So that's why it is said that there are two different kinds of accumulation. The accumulation of knowledge, which is the relative view, and the accumulation of wisdom, which is the absolute view. And in the state of enlightenment, as Buddhas, we will have both of those. And the Buddha, in fact, has both of those kinds of knowledge. Upon having the two different kinds of wisdom, one understands not only relativity, that is to say, the interactions between subject and object, between self and other, the interactions between objects that appear to be externalized. One understands not only that, but one understands the underlying primordial wisdom state. And in that state, in that realization, in that wisdom, which is the ability to perceive the true nature, the ability to perceive the primordial wisdom state, one is completely awake and is able to I should not say is able to. One is completely awakened to the great, limitless luminosity that I spoke of earlier, which is the subjectless, objectless awareness. That state of innate wakefulness. Having attained that state, one's mind is not caught up in the fantasy of duality. One's mind is not trapped in the habitual tendency of externalizing phenomena. One's perception is purified. What does that mean? It's important to stop there for a minute and examine that. Because when we think of perception being purified, we have no idea what that honestly means, because the only perception we have ever known is the perception associated with the presupposition of self-nature as being inherently real, as I described earlier, the five senses, and the exaggerations that come from that, the thoughts that come from perception, the conclusions that come from conceptualization based on perception. All of our understanding has happened in that way, so that all that we have ever known has been computed through the five senses. And these five senses actually are extensions of our ego. They are actually outgrowths of our ego. They are the way that the self explores the world, computes the world. And if all of our experience has happened in that way, we have, therefore, no sense of our true nature. No real sense of it. All of our conclusions have come from the information of the five senses. Therefore, when we think of purifying the five senses, all that we can imagine is me purifying my sight, seeing other purely. And so we can only understand, perhaps, seeing the Buddha nature in something else, you see? Or we can only understand perceiving something else in a pure way, a celestial way. That's all that we can truly understand. It is very difficult for us to come to a completely different place in our understanding of perception well enough to understand that, in fact, to even consider purifying the five senses, one has to suppose that it is possible to be aware without the presupposition of self. And that awareness is nothing like anything that we have ever perceived with the five senses, or any idea that we have ever come to with the aid of the five senses. It isn't anything like that. again, it is more like luminosity than it is like perception. Or then it is like subject-object awareness, divided awareness. So when we think of purifying the five senses, we have to think not of our changing in some way that we as sentient beings can imagine ourselves being, and we also cannot imagine what we would be like if we purified our five senses. It really isn't like that at all. We have to imagine what the precious awakening would be like. We have to imagine what it would be like for the mind to remain stable and poised in a moment of pure cognition. Cognition independent of any vehicle to carry it in. Cognition independent of any concept that we might attach to it and develop it with. In fact, we have to imagine cognition that is described in this way, as being natural and immediate, and yet spontaneously liberated. Well, as you might have noticed, we immediately begin to tussle with that big time. What in the world does that mean? We have to imagine a kind of cognition, a kind of awareness that occurs in the same way a camera sees. When the camera sees, it sees through a lens. There's no brain behind the camera. I mean, unless you're working it, and I assume that if you are working it, you have one. But let's take you out of the picture. That was a pun. Let's take you out of the situation completely. How does the camera see? The camera simply records what light does on a sensitive piece of paper. But what that picture means, what it represents, we interpret. We give it meaning. We call it a name. So we have to imagine what an awareness would be like, something like would function that is something like the camera, that simply in an ultimately passive way records, not records, I shouldn't say that word, sees, witnesses. According to the Buddha, perception is not the opposite of enlightenment. Perception is not the problem. If we saw the way a camera sees, simply viewing, we wouldn't be in such trouble. Where trouble happens is due to desire. Desire is what causes all sentient beings to suffer. What happens is after we see the picture, after perception happens, we make meaning. We form concept. We play off one thing against another. We conceptualize. And all of that stuff happens due to the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, and all of that is exactly geared to give it meaning. It has to make meaning out of what would not have meaning if one did not make the meaning out of it. Does that make any sense? When you say spontaneously liberating and naturally occurring, we are speaking of the kind of awareness in which phenomena could naturally, and does naturally, arise out of emptiness, remain inseparable from emptiness, rest consistent with emptiness, and be ultimately the same as emptiness. Where phenomena arises the same as emptiness, from emptiness, inseparable from emptiness, and is allowed to liberate itself spontaneously because one does not go after it. One does not cling to it. One does not form it into something. One does not knit it into meaning. It must be natural for phenomena to coexist with emptiness, because it does. It must be natural for form and formless to coexist comfortably, because they do. It must be natural for all phenomena to arise spontaneously from the sphere of truth, which is the sphere of emptiness, because it does. It must be natural for that which is the Buddha to perceive, because it has and it continues to do so. But what becomes unnatural is when we cling to phenomena. When we cling to the idea of self, cling to phenomena, cling to the continuum that we are creating, cling to the artificial structure that we are creating, and through our process of perception, consciousness, and conceptualization, and all of the exaggerations that come from that, the proliferations that continue one on top of the other, suffering occurs, because from that place of clinging, from that place of compulsion, from that place of desire, there is a process of externalization that is so profound, that a constant cause and effect relationship continues. And it is so complicated, so overwhelming, so highly developed, to the degree that every single occurrence that occurs within that relative realm has the energy to initiate and be the catalyst for another circumstance, which is the catalyst for another circumstance, which is the catalyst for another circumstance. And these continue to arise interdependently, appearing as cause and effect relationships. And that is the realm, the sphere of activity, the realm of activity from which all potential for suffering arises and is constructed. There is no other suffering than that. It arises within that realm of activity. Other than that, there is the nature. And the nature is what it is. Free of the stuff that suffering is made out of. So, the experience that we have then is within this realm of interdependent phenomena, cause and effect relationships, continually, cyclically arising. And therefore, we do not realize the primordial wisdom state. We are not awake to the pure, uncontrived view that is our underlying innate nature. Now, when we speak of supreme generosity, one must understand this underlying view. One must have some understanding of how our experience arises, of what actually is occurring as we move through our experience. And then one must understand something of the experience of primordial wisdom. That in that experience, one is, as the Buddha described, simply awake. The Buddha was asked, "Are you a great teacher? Are you a great savior? What kind of guy are you?" I don't know if he was asked exactly like that, and he said very simply, "I am awake." And that is the state that we speak of, simply awake to that innate nature. This supreme generosity, then, is consistent with that awakeness. In that state of awakening, one perceives phenomena. One can have the experience of perception, but one does not cling to experience or contrive experience in such a way as to confirm the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. Because one not only has the experience of knowledge, of interdependent relationships, of cause and effect, one also has the experience of wisdom, which is the innate nature, the experience of emptiness, of the primordial wisdom, empty state. So, one experiences then that nature continually, one is awake to that nature and does not engage in the contrivance or falsehood of artificial construction. Do you see what I'm saying? One does not engage in that falsehood. And not engaging in that falsehood, perception can occur. It is possible, because perception does occur. Phenomena coexists with emptiness. It is possible, because phenomena does coexist with emptiness. Emptiness and fullness are not separated. It is possible, because they are inseparable. And in that state, what is perceived, what arises, does so naturally and is allowed in the same way that a bubble rising to the top of a lake will naturally do what bubbles do. is allowed to spontaneously spontaneously be liberated. That is to say, if one does not continue the bubble, if one does not force the bubble, if one does not cling to the bubble, if one does not contrive a way to maintain the bubble will do what bubbles do. And so that state needs to be at least understood that much in order to understand supreme generosity. Because in the state of supreme generosity, from its ultimate point of view, from its most profound point of view, one does not consider subject and object. One does not consider internal and external. One does not consider method so much as one considers nature. It isn't that method is ignored. It's that in realizing nature, method is automatically considered. But not in an overt way. One practices then in such a way as though one had the view of the Buddha. How does the Buddha consider compassion or generosity? Compassion or generosity is one of the naturally arising qualities of enlightenment. It is a naturally arising and spontaneous emanation, in that, having attained enlightenment, a Buddha can only bring about activity which is beneficial to others. In that state of awakening, it is not possible for a Buddha to do other than benefit beings. It simply is not possible. It cannot be done. Even if we were to see a Buddha right here, right now, and even if that Buddha were to speak, for instance, wrathfully to a person here, slap him around a little bit. From our point of view, that might seem like a really terrible thing to do. We might think, oh, here in America, that's not very polite. And here in suburbia, that certainly isn't even done. And so what to do? This Buddha's not very nice. If this Buddha is truly a Buddha, truly a realized Buddha, then absolutely what has occurred, no matter what it seems like to us, will bring about good result. As a little aside, that is how we think in Vajrayana, because one of the specific unique qualities of Vajrayana is that one practices as though fruition were inherent within the path. So one practices as though fruition were already the case. One practices pure view. You see? Then one sees one's teacher. One thinks of one's teacher as that which brings Buddhahood, so one thinks of one's teacher as the Buddha. Or as the emanation of the teaching of the Buddha. Or as the door to liberation, or something like that. And then one thinks of one's teacher in such a way that one has faith in the teacher's teachings and the teacher's actions, and after much consideration, one comes to the point where if the teacher says, go back and do Mundro again, or go back and do some practice again, you haven't done it well, or go back and do something that you don't like to do, or if the teacher says to the student something that is upsetting or wrathful, the student is supposed to meditate in such a way as to think that this situation, this thing that has just happened, will bring me ultimate benefit. It will bring me ultimate benefit. It has brought ultimate benefit already. This that I'm seeing, although it seems to me to be a wrathful display, in fact is the seed, is the seedling of ultimate benefit. And so we meditate in that way with our teachers, and then what happens is whatever occurs is of ultimate benefit. And then the method and the fruit become the same, and are realized when the fruit is eaten to be the same. And so when we practice supreme generosity, likewise, and in the same line, we should practice as though we already had the pure view and full understanding of the Buddha. We should think, first of all, as the Buddha recognizes, that all sentient beings are equal. That in their nature, they are all equally Buddhas. There is no one superior and no one inferior. We should think that even the seemingly lowliest of life forms is in its very nature the Supreme Lord, the Buddha. And that even those life forms which seem ultimately superior are the same. We should think that even Lord Buddha himself had experienced the entire gamut of cyclic existence, had experienced all the different life experiences, all the different egocentric conceptualizations that we do, all the hatred, greed, and ignorance, all the sufferings of cyclic existence that we experience and have experienced and continue to experience. And due to his perseverance and his practice, went on to achieve supreme realization. And that Lord Buddha himself, then, is the very same nature as we are. That, in that ultimate view, the artificial construction of self, the idea of self, the conceptualization, the concept of self, is considered to be a deluded concept. That in fact, not only are all sentient beings equal in their nature, but they are the same in their nature and inseparable in their nature. That in fact, according to the Buddha, there is no eternally surviving self. But there is nature. Which is incapable of death and birth. And that nature should not be understood as simply a greater ego. That is the mistake that we make, because we are raised with the idea of eternalism. It isn't simply a larger ego. It is something other than that altogether. It is the innate nature. Now, that idea is important because now we have to think, how should we consider other sentient beings? How should we think of them? How should we practice accordingly? If we understand the Buddha's view, if we understand something of what the Buddha understands, we should think then of how to understand sentient beings. According to this view, if all sentient beings are completely the same, if in their nature they are indistinguishable one from the other, if there is no separate self, if that idea is a delusion, if there is simply the nature, then any time we act in a selfish way, any time we act to promote our own well-being to the exclusion of others, any time we fulfill our desire at some cost to our environment in any way, believe it or not, we are acting inappropriately. And that's the simple logical truth. We are acting out of accordance with our own nature. We are acting as though we were not what we are. So, through most of our experience in cyclic existence, we have been basically neurotic, acting inappropriately, trying to get happiness when the method that we are using is not consistent with ultimate nature. And this, according to the Buddha, is why it never works. The one thing we have in common as human beings and as sentient beings is that we are all trying to be happy. We are, all of us, trying to be happy in the best way we know. Even those people that murder, even those people that steal, even those people that hurt others, even those people that dominate others, in their way, they're trying to be happy because they have some kind of twisted idea that supremacy or power will make them happy, and they have developed a greediness or a compulsion for that feeling of supremacy or power. But they're really trying to be happy. They're acting completely inappropriately, though, if one thinks of their true nature, because they're Buddhas in nature. And as Buddhas, they are completely inseparable from their victims. They are completely the same as their victims. They have completely separated themselves from the potential of viewing their own nature in order to view something as external to the degree that they can either dominate it or, the flip side of that coin, submit to it. And it's simply neurotic behavior. Neurotic meaning that neurotic behavior is that behavior which does not bring about the desired goal. Simply that. Haven't you ever seen a person that, for instance, really wants other people to love him or her? And in order to do that, goes around acting like a real pain in the neck? Haven't you ever seen people whine to get love? And have the rest of the world on a regular basis go whap, 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 whap. Of course you've seen that, and you say, isn't that person neurotic? Poor thing. Well, if we really look at ourselves, and this is a terrible, shocking thing to look at, from the Buddha's point of view, if you consider what the nature is, if you consider that on every atom of our environment, on every molecule, there are uncountable Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas without number. That every single bit of any kind of phenomena, every kind of sentient being, every kind of event is completely consistent with, inseparable from, and the same as the sphere of truth. And yet, we act as though something were happening, and we're in here, and that's over there, and we're trying to make things happen, and we walk around with a terminal case of environmental manipulation. Really a terminal case, because we do it till we die. So, we walk around trying to manipulate our environment, we walk around not acting in accordance with this nature, and according to the Buddha, this is the cause of suffering. Now, in the case of supreme generosity, one understands. And here is the important part. One understands to the degree that one can begin to recognize the truth of this teaching. Maybe we can't see the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas without number on every molecule. Maybe we don't have, I'm sure we don't always have the capacity to look at one another and say, yeah, that's a Buddha, all right. And maybe that's not really what's supposed to happen. I have lots of students come to me and say, well, how am I supposed to see this person as a Buddha? She acts like a jerk. You know, how am I supposed to do this? And on a regular basis, these questions are asked to me. I don't really think that that's what the teaching is. I don't think that we're supposed to look at, let's see, where's a name tag I can read? We're supposed to look at Lynn, or maybe look at Bob over there, and see him sitting in a full lotus posture, you know, with perfect equipoise, and you know, sitting in the proper position, just as Lord Buddha did, with saffron robes and the whole bit. Every time we see him, I don't think that we're supposed to deny the fact that we see him as we see him, and try to see instead this Buddha. I don't think that's what the teaching is. I think that one should know in one's heart the essential nature, except that it is not always visible. Except that our perceptual process is based on making distinction between self and other, and that therefore within the realm of that one cannot experience sameness or suchness. Not within that realm. And yet know and be consistent within one's practice toward the point where one begins to stabilize one's mind into a state which is free of that kind of separation. And it takes time. So, practicing accordingly, one begins to understand, not in such a way that you pretend everything's a Buddha, but in such a way that you develop an awareness that it is fruitless, ultimately fruitless, to act in such a way as to continue the artificial construction of self. So it isn't that you say, I better be good to this guy because he's a Buddha. It's more that you say, it is fruitless, it is useless to continue this insistence on the artificial construction of self, and that I should simply relax my mind. One's practice then is much deeper. It isn't a visualization then. It isn't a pretending. It isn't a acting in what can be an even more neurotic way. And that is acting differently than you really feel. It isn't putting a Band-Aid on an ulcer. Instead, one practices in such a way that one learns to the depth of one's heart that this is fruitless. This continuation of this continuum is fruitless.
Joy